Hey guys, how are you? So this is the editorial analysis of newspapers that is for today and yesterday combined because we did not find any relevant articles from yesterday's newspaper from the Hindu, and most of the Indian Express one we had covered and the Mint one we had already covered in our previous editions. But then since there were two interesting articles in today's newspapers from the Hindu, and then we skipped one article on which one I had framed the question previously about the paradox of democracy. That I felt was pretty relevant, and I felt the need that I should cover it in today's editions. So this is a combined lesson of the 2 days for today and yesterday will be presented to you by me, Dipanshu Singh. You can read more about me on this slide. You can also follow me on Academy on this link to get updates on my courses and on my videos. But guys, please rate and review the course and recommend each and every video. So the articles which will be covered today are these three. Apart from that, the practice question for today is regarding the growing synergy between India and the Middle East is actually a testimony to the economic and strategic importance of the region in India. So therefore elucidate this question and your answers, and then go and attempt these questions at the Unacademy's Discuss page, and you can find the Unacademy's Discuss page on the bubble over here at the Unacademy's main website. Apart from that, these are three interesting articles. Actually, I have covered this article already in the Hindu summary, so you can go and watch that this article, very important from prelims point of view. Apart from that, these two articles are also important. This is important for prelims and mains, and this is important for prelims regarding vulture conservation in Nilgiris. So this is from the Sunday magazine. So the first article is about the leprosy in India. So why India needs to step up its fight against leprosy. So if you look at India's fight against leprosy is far from over even after 16 years that it has been eliminated globally as a public health issue. So there have been several reports by WHO which says that India actually accounts for 60% of such cases worldwide. If you look at the statistics, out of the global people affected by leprosy is around 212,000 people globally. India alone accounts for 127,326 people, which is accounting to 60% of the new cases. And the other high burden countries are Brazil and Indonesia. So if you look at this map, the highest burden is with India, and then there's a small island of Madagascar near Africa. Apart from that, the other incidence rates are some sub-African countries and the Brazilian country, and then comes Indonesia and other South American countries. So why there are dismal numbers for India? So India is among the 22 countries considered as having a highest burden or high burden of leprosy, along with the high transmission rate by WHO. So although there's a misconception that the leprosy actually affects a lot of both the sexes, but then the males have a higher ratio, 2:1 ratio than females, according to WHO's Global Leprosy Report. As an effective treatment of leprosy is the multi-drug therapy or MDT, which has been available since 1980s and can actually fully cure leprosy, but then there's a shortfall of this therapy in India, and obviously which is available is not fully and effectively implemented. Now, why and how it spreads? So while the mode of transmission of leprosy is actually not known, the most widely held belief is that the disease was transmitted by contact between the person which is infected with the healthy person, and there have been possibilities of transmission lately by respiratory route which is gaining ground, and there are also other possibilities of a transmission through vector or insects, which cannot be completely ruled out. So what needs to be done to effectively tackle this? So first of all, we need to effectively combat the social stigma which is associated with people affected by this leprosy, and also the program needs a multi-sectoral approach. So health authorities basically need to reach out to and include leprosy affected persons and communities in their programming models, and the laws of regulation also that sanction or abet discrimination against persons suffering from leprosy should be repealed, or should be made in such way that it actually prevents the discrimination and the social stigma affected by these people. And they also need to counter these social attitudes. So therefore the role of NGO and civil society inevitably becomes very important. They should include in their campaigns to challenge leprosy related stigma and to address discrimination against the affected person and their family members. Now therefore in 2016 WHO had launched the Global Leprosy Strategy 2016 to 2020, and therefore under this program India has been advised to include strategic interventions in national plans to meet the new targets, such as the screening of all close contact of persons who are affected by leprosy, promoting a shorter uniform treatment regimen, and incorporating specific interventions against the stigmatization and discriminations faced by the people affected by leprosy. So when is the World Leprosy Day celebrated? So mention that in the comment sections below. Now next article is regarding the corporate tax and the high rate of corporate tax in India, and how it is affecting the investment in India, and how it is affecting the manufacturing sector subsequently, and affecting the Make in India program of India. So there has been a common notion and an Indian myth that is a favorite all-time topic, is that one must increase tax rates to actually increase the tax revenues, and the tax rate on Indian corporate is generally very low. Now, if you look at the history of tax rates, so personal income tax was reduced as a three-tier structure depending on your income bracket to 10, 20, 30% in 1997. Then the flat corporate tax was actually reduced to 35% in 1997 and then subsequently to 30% where now it stands since 2005. But then finance ministry and budgets have come and gone and they have come forth with additional taxes in the form of, there have, the corporate tax rate has been generally kept standard post 2005, but then there have been inclusion of certain surcharges and cesses over the years, but the tax rate has generally remained sacrosanct or almost stable. So we'll look at the corporate tax structure in India. So the existing reality of a tax rate of 30% is effectively a rate of 25%. Obviously, there's a 5% gap between the stated and effective tax due to the exemptions which is provided by under certain schemes by the Indian government. Now, the Indian corporate sector is actually one of the most heavily taxed in the world. So there was an index by the Center of Business Transactions. There are actually two indexes which reflect on this reality. So their effective average tax rate and the other index is the effective marginal tax rate. So in 2016, India had the fourth highest EATR of 30.8%. That is the effective average tax rate, which reflects that why the corporate sector is heavily taxed. And then the top three countries are the US, France, and Argentina regarding the same. And then the EMTR, that is effective marginal tax rate, was 22.8% for India, and India effectively ranked seventh highest on this index. So what these rankings indicate, basically, this affects our ease of doing business. For the last 2 years, if you look at our rank has generally stayed constant around 130.5, 131, and 130 in 2015-16. So one of the major reasons for our rank not changing is the high rate of taxation for the corporate sector, which affects the investment in this corporate sector, because obviously every corporate and investment firm or investment company looks for the maximum return on their investment. So if the tax rates are high, so generally they will route their money through round tripping through the tax havens. So that is one of the biggest issue. Or generally they will use the use of P notes and other features through the stock markets to invest in India, obviously to avoid taxes. So the World Bank has also estimated in 2016 that Indian corporates actually paid a tax rate of 60.6% of the corporate profits. This came about because it composed of 21% corporate income tax, 4% of dividend distribution tax, 15% of social security contributions, and 14% of the central sales tax, and etc. Now, if you look at the global comparison, so East Asian competitors pay an average of about 35%, South Asian countries are paying around 38%, then Bangladesh pays around 35%, which is actually 5% higher than Indian tax rate. And India's rank on tax rate is 172 out of 19 countries. So this is one of the biggest reason why the investment rate has been steadily going down and is actually now close to zero for the corporate sector, which is so shocking. I know most of the people might not be aware of this fact. So this is one of the major reasons why also manufacturing does not grow and lags behind every major country in the world. So just not by including Make in India program, as per this article, it won't help unless we reduce the corporate taxes to boost the investor sentiment in India. So what can be done to address this? So if the corporate tax rate can actually be reduced to 25% with no additional cesses and surcharge and removal of exemption, then India competitiveness will begin to improve, and obviously it will benefit the Make in India program. Now, if we remove the exemption, so it will effectively come down to 20%, which is compatible with the maximum marginal personal income tax rate of 20%. So bringing down to almost to that level. So what will this result in declining revenues? So if you look at the Laffer curve, which is based on taxation versus revenue, so there's an optimal tax rate which every government wants to achieve, by which they can achieve the maximum revenue, because after that optimal tax rate, if you go on increasing the tax rate, the revenues will fall. This is by the Laffer curve. So that is the simple methodology which can be used by these governments. So tax revenues will increase in the case because of increase in tax compliance, because reducing the tax rate, which will actually increase the number of tax compliance, and a meaningful reduction will be effective in the corporate rate tax if you correctly follow through to the logic and the pain of demonetization. So if we want to counter the effects of demonetization, it is very, very pertinent and important that the corporate taxes are reduced. Otherwise, the economy will be hurt. So this is it about the corporate taxes article. The next one is an interesting article for which I had framed one question regarding the Republic's paradox. This is between democracy and elections in India. So a very, very interesting article by Pratap Bhanu Mehta. Generally, he uses a very complicated terminologies to write his articles, but then I felt this article can be summarized in a better way, which can be used in your answer writing practice and to understand the current paradox of our Indian democracy between the elections and India. So basically, Ambedkar, our founding fathers defined democracy as a means to bring about a significant change in the living conditions of the repressed classes without resorting to bloodsheds or warfare. So therefore, democracy actually empowers the people to have their sovereign power to consciously participate in the democratic process, because they can obviously choose their representatives who would ultimately reinforce their will through parliament, and obviously that's hardly the case right now. This is one of the biggest paradox, because Parliament does not function well, and most of the people who we elect to be our representatives don't do the work which we want them to do. So apart from that, there are certain basic conditions and foundations which need to be created to have a successful democracy in India. First and foremost is obviously empowerment of the weakest sections of society, like poor, disabled, minorities. Then obviously elected representatives should perform their task and they should not misuse the power. We also need to have a presence of a strong public opinion through civil society and NGO. Then eradication of social evils is inevitable. Then we need to have tolerance and communal harmony among people, which is getting affected these days. And most importantly, in recent times, we should have a space to express dissent in our democracy, and we should have the right and the freedom to exercise and to criticize others, which is hardly a case these days. So if you say anything against a particular group or a community or a particular government or a political party, you are termed as anti-nationalist. So these are the certain paradoxes of our democracy which is being highlighted in this article. So if you look at the universal suffrage and elections, so basically election process is one of the first means to realize the ideals of democracy, because it basically allows the people to choose their representatives and therefore create a sustainable and a livable society among them. So when the constitution was initially prepared, our founding fathers were a little apprehensive about introducing democracy in our constitution and our system, but then they showed a lot of moral courage, and it was a morally daring act for the nationalist movement to introduce democracy and election and universal suffrage to the people, because most of the people were not literate, and there were apprehensions from a lot of people that India does not deserve a democracy right now. So in spite of that, our nationalist founders took this moral daring act of encouraging universal suffrage and introducing universal suffrage in our constitution and our electoral process. So this assertion of political equality actually marked the creation of a new India at the time of independence. So far, if you look at India's greatest achievement, that has been adhering to political equality in every election. So the scale and the exuberance and the excitement, dignity of Indian election has been such that it has almost evoked positive response about India's democracy from all over the world. India's democracy is one of the most respected democracies in the world. It is one of the largest democracies. It is actually the largest democracy in the world, and the oldest being obviously United States of America. So the role of Election Commission has been inevitable, and it has emerged as a vital institution that safeguards this cornerstone of modern Indian identity, that are the elections. And so this mundane act of just preparing the electoral rolls is just not a bureaucratic exercise. It's more, and goes beyond that. It's more than that, because it is actually a fundamental act through which each individual gets a political standing. They can express their views, they can express their voting rights, they can assert their independence. So at the same time, therefore, elections formed a critical portion of upholding our democratic values. Now, if you look at democracy in elections, so elections is one of the main events that have actually united Indians. So if you have a question regarding unity and diversity, elections can be one of the important points of binding our Indian citizens. But however, in present time, it is frequently being realized that the democracy is found to be limiting itself to just to the electoral process, because there has been some statements by some people that in India, basically democracy exists just for the sake of elections. So just that every year we have certain elections coming up, either in state or at the central level. So basically, democracy is just an exercise just for the sake of elections, which is actually not true. It can just be taken as a political humor, because although it raises a pertinent question about the relations between election and democracy in India. So this is misused because sometimes the concentration of power gets legitimized by elections in certain circumstances, which goes against the ideals of democracy. Obviously, the ideals of being liberty, equality of opportunity. So these are abused by the bureaucrats and politicians after they have been elected or they are in power by indulging in corruption and other related activities. So the great quality and the positive thing about election is that it gives political standing and politicizes all aspects of Indian society, whether it's irrespective of caste, class, caste, religion, and income. But then it can also be a handicap, because generally it's being misused by our electoral candidates to invoke and to seek votes on the basis of class, caste, and religion. Therefore, the civic structures and the state administration has to be reformed, and they need to follow and imbibe the democratic values in them. So the founders of our constitution were absolutely clear that entering into a relationship with a fellow citizen through a constitution is a very special type of relationship, and this can only be done through electoral process. So universal adult suffrage, basically embodies this new modality, and elections democracy therefore make the criticism of government actually possible without fear. At the same time, continue to have to respect for constitutional framework. However, when this gets abused and becomes subordinate to individual leaders, like what's the case right now, there is an impatience in the institution. This basically challenges the surface to maintain constitutional values. So the aim of election should be to try to elect representatives who have the abilities to uphold the constitutional principles and assist democracy to never assault the constitutional core. And therefore, practice of democracy should not be limited to conduct of elections. Success of India's democracy depends on believing its constitutional values and practicing the same. So you can link this article with the RPA issue. So till next video, I hope you have a good day. Thank you so much, guys.